Ready for some seriously big questions today? We're diving into life, death, the ultimate mystery, what comes after. Ever find yourselves kind of like wondering, is this it? Or could there be some cosmic rewind button we get to hit?
Yeah, it's one of those universal questions, right? I mean, it gets at the very core of how we understand ourselves, our purpose, the whole shebang.
Totally. And for this deep dive, we're tackling these questions head on. We're going to unpack this article a listener sent our way, all about the different ways people have tried to make sense of the afterlife. Specifically, we are comparing how Christianity views rebirth with reincarnation in, like, the Hindu and Buddhist traditions.
And this isn't just a surface level look either. This article goes deep. It's diving into the scriptures of all three of these belief systems. Like, what do they actually say about the soul's journey?
Right, we're not messing around here. We're going straight to the source. And right off the bat, the article kind of lays out its main point, arguing that the Christian idea of rebirth, well, it might just be the most logical and maybe even the most hopeful way to think about the afterlife, at least more so than reincarnation. But is it really that straightforward?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And to help us figure that out, the article breaks down all the differences into three main buckets.
Mm-hmm.
How each tradition sees the soul, what they believe is the whole point of existence in the first place, and how we supposedly achieve salvation or, liberation.
Okay, so like a roadmap for a deep dive. I like it. So first up, let's talk about the soul. It's fascinating how differently Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism view what the soul actually is.
Absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation, is it? For example, the article points out how in Christianity, there's this big emphasis on each soul being unique, especially created by God. It's even there in Genesis 1:27, where it says that humans are made in the image of God, the Imago Dei.
So each person carries this like spark of the divine within them. That's a pretty powerful image.
It really is. And it contrasts quite a bit with how Hinduism and Buddhism often approach it, where the goal is often to move beyond that individual identity, to kind of merge with this larger universal consciousness.
Okay, so we've got these souls, right? Uniquely crafted or maybe part of a bigger universal tapestry. But what happens next? That's where the article really digs into how each belief system sees the whole point of existence in the first place.
Yeah, and this is where things get super interesting. The article points out this fascinating contrast in how these traditions deal with, well, suffering. The age-old question, why bad things happen to good people?
Right, like, is there some kind of purpose to suffering? Or is it just random chaos we have to endure?
Exactly. And the article highlights that for Hinduism and Buddhism, suffering is kind of baked into the whole reincarnation thing. It's the price you pay for past actions, karma playing out over lifetimes.
Well, like cosmic balance sheet, we reap what we sow, even if we don't remember planting the seeds.
Exactly. But then the article brings in the Christian perspective and, well, the idea of a loving God kind of throws a wrench in that whole karma-based system. Like, if God is all loving, then why is there so much suffering in the world? It's a question theologians have wrestled with for centuries.
So how does the article square those two ideas? A loving God and a world filled with suffering?
Well, it suggests that Christianity offers a different way of looking at those tough experiences. It argues that suffering, while not necessarily a good thing in itself, can actually be a catalyst for growth, for drawing closer to God, even for discovering a deeper purpose.
Huh. So it's not just about, like, trying to escape the cycle of suffering altogether.
Right. It's a different perspective, for
Yeah.
sure. And that actually leads us to the third big difference. That article tackles how each belief system approaches the idea of salvation or liberation. So in Hinduism and Buddhism, it often comes down to earning your way out of that cycle of reincarnation, through good deeds, meditation, racking up good karma points, that sort of thing. It's a path of self-effort, of striving for enlightenment.
So you're putting in the work, lifetime after lifetime, to reach that ultimate goal.
Yeah, that's the general idea. But the article then points out this radically different path offered by Christianity, the path of grace.
Grace. You mean like it's a gift, not something you earn?
Exactly. The article even quotes Ephesians 2:8-9, which says, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast."
Wow, so no more racking up spiritual brownie points to get into the afterlife. It's about accepting this free gift from God.
That's the idea the article's getting at. It's about this relationship with God made possible through Jesus that goes beyond this whole cycle of birth and death.
Okay, so we've got these three major differences. how the soul is viewed, the purpose of all this, and the way to salvation or liberation. But the article doesn't just stop there, right? It goes on to say that based on these differences, well, Christian rebirth just makes more sense. It's more logical. What do you make of that argument?
It's a bold statement for sure. And to back it up, the article gives three main reasons why it sees Christian rebirth as the more logical choice.
Okay, I'm listening. What are they?
First, they call it the salvation guarantee. Basically, it's not about hoping you've banked enough good karma to avoid coming back as a dung beetle. It's about having this confident assurance of spending eternity with God.
No more cosmic roulette wheel, huh? Spin it and see where you land in the next life.
Not if you subscribe to this view. They even quote Jesus from John 11:25-26, where he says, "Whoever lives by believing in me will never die." A pretty strong statement about the certainty of it all.
I can see how that would ease some existential anxiety. No more worrying about messing up and getting stuck in some endless reincarnation loop.
Right. And that leads to the article's second argument for the logic of Christian rebirth. They say it offers a better answer to that problem of suffering we were talking about. The article admits that reincarnation has a hard time explaining why we're born into tough situations we seemingly earned from past lives, but can't even remember.
Yeah, that does seem a little unfair, doesn't it? How are you supposed to learn from your mistakes if you don't know what you did wrong in the first place?
It's a good point. The article even quotes Ravi Zacharias, who compared karma to getting the bill for a meal you don't remember ordering.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a pretty accurate analogy. So if it's not about paying off karmic debt from a past life, what does Christianity say?
The article argues that Christianity finds a more just answer in the concept of sin, and even more importantly, God's forgiveness. It's not about being punished for things you did in a past life, but about accepting a pardon, a clean slate, through a relationship with God.
So grace steps in and wipes the slate clean, no matter what we may or may not have done in some past life. Okay, that makes sense. What's the third argument they make?
The last one boils down to what the article calls the you do you eternally principle. They circle back to the whole soul thing and remind us that reincarnation often sees the individual self as an illusion, something you ultimately want to transcend.
So the goal is to merge into this big cosmic soup. Leave your own individual identity behind.
That's one way to look at it. But the article contrasts that with the Christian emphasis on the eternal value of each person. Remember, Imago Dei. You're created in the image of God, and that uniqueness, that individual spark, it matters.
So it's not about losing yourself, but becoming your truest self. In relationship with God, of course. That is a very different way of thinking about it.
It really is. And the article suggests that this focus on how important each person is might actually make the Christian view more, personally fulfilling. It's not about disappearing into some big impersonal force, but having this unique personal connection with God that continues after death.
Okay, so the article makes its case, laying out why they see Christian rebirth as this more logical, hopeful way to look at things. But they don't just leave it at that, right? To back up their claims, they bring in the big guns, C.S. Lewis, John Stott, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's like assembling a dream team of intellectuals to weigh in.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, don't just take our word for it. Listen to what these brilliant minds have to say. And each of these thinkers brings something unique to the table, adding even more depth to our understanding of Christian rebirth.
It's like we've got front row seats to this theological debate, so where do we even start with these heavy hitters? Who's up first?
Well, we could kick things off with C.S. Lewis, the genius behind the Chronicles of Narnia.
Okay, yeah.
What's interesting is that Lewis saw Christian rebirth as this radical, complete transformation. Not like a gradual evolution over many lifetimes, which you might see in reincarnation, but more like a total reset, a brand new beginning.
So no more baggage from past lives, just a clean slate.
Exactly. Lewis believed it was about surrendering to Christ, fully embracing this new life, empowered by God's grace.
When you put it like that, it's a really hopeful idea. Second chances, new beginnings. Everyone loves a good redemption arc.
Well, I know, right? And speaking of grace, that's something our next big thinker, John Stott, was super passionate about.
Okay, what did Stott have to say?
Well, Stott, brilliant theologian that he was also known for making these complex ideas relatable.
Sure. So no ivory tower stuff.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Stott wanted everyone to understand how radical this idea of grace really is. He was all about highlighting the difference between trying to earn your way to a good afterlife versus accepting God's love and forgiveness as a free gift.
It is humbling, isn't it, when you realize it's not about how many spiritual gold stars we've earned. It's about accepting this totally undeserved, unconditional love.
Exactly. And that leads us to our final heavyweight, Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
What about Bonhoeffer?
Well, Bonhoeffer was a German pastor and theologian who actively resisted the Nazis.
Wow. Talk about putting your faith into action. So what did he think about rebirth?
Well, for Bonhoeffer, Christian rebirth wasn't just some cosmic reset button, It was a call to action. It was about living a transformed life because of that belief.
So it's not enough to just believe in the afterlife.
Yeah.
You've got to let that belief change how you live right now in the present.
That's exactly it. Bonhoeffer was all about living with purpose, following Christ, making your life a reflection of that inner transformation.
Wow, that's powerful. It really drives home the point that these beliefs aren't just abstract ideas. They have real implications for how we live our lives, how we interact with each other, how we see the world.
100%. And that's what I think makes this whole conversation so fascinating. We're not just picking apart theological terms. We're wrestling with ideas that have the power to shape us, give us hope, and challenge us to think differently about the big questions.
I totally agree. And even though we've covered a lot of ground today, from the soul to grace and everything in between, this deep dive has really just scratched the surface. This article, with its contrasting views on rebirth and reincarnation, it's opened up a whole universe of questions worth exploring further.
It really has. That's the beauty of it all. It gets us curious, encourages us to keep searching, to keep asking those what-if questions.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive on rebirth and reincarnation, we want to leave you with one last thought-provoking question. If, as some Christian thinkers suggest, what we do in this life echoes into eternity, how might that change how you choose to live today?
Really makes you think, doesn't it? It challenges us to think about the impact of our choices, the ripple effects of our actions, and how much each day really matters.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive for today. Don't forget to check out our show notes for links to the article we discussed, as well as some further reading from those theological giants we talked about.
Happy exploring, everyone. Keep those minds engaged, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.